What are the most interesting domino effects in history? From Wikipedia. This is probably my favorite, that escalated quickly. In 80 AD, Flavius Josephus recorded the first known incident of mooning. Josephus recorded that in the procuratorship of Ventidius Cumanus 48–52 AD, at around the beginning of the First Roman-Jewish War, a soldier in the Roman army mooned Jewish pilgrims at the Jewish temple in Jerusalem who had gathered for Passover, and spake such words as you might expect upon such a posture, causing a riot in which youths threw stones at the soldiers, who then called in reinforcements. The pilgrims panicked, and the ensuing stampede resulted in the death of 10,000 Jews. Star Trek. Voyager was not as well received as previous Star Trek series. In 1997, producers decided to add a new character in an attempt to boost ratings. Actress Jeri Ryan was brought in to play Seven of Nine. Jeri's frequent separations from her husband, Jack Ryan, due to her acting schedule contributed to their decision to divorce in 1999. In 2004, Jack Ryan became the Republican nominee for an open Senate seat in Illinois. During the campaign, the proceedings from Ryan's divorce became public, and contained details of his life that did not make him look good. The scandal forced Ryan to drop out of the Senate race in July, leaving the GOP time to only find token opposition to Democratic nominee Barack Obama. Obama's landslide victory in the Senate race helped launch him onto the national stage, allowing him to pull off an upset victory in the 2008 Democratic primary and win the presidential election. George Lucas really wanted to make a Howard the Duck movie, and after ROTJ, he had the pull to do it, but Howard the Duck lost George Lucas so much money that he had to sell the animation part of Lucasfilm. He sold it to Steve Jobs, and it later became Pixar. During the First World War, in an attempt to destabilize the collapsing Russian Empire, the German Empire allowed safe passage for known revolutionary Vladimir I. Lenin from his refuge in Switzerland to the Finland station in St. Petersburg. Roughly 30 years later, Germany would be beaten into the ground by the armies of the Soviet Union, the nation Lenin had successfully formed before his death. Germans done goofed. Matt Groening's comic Life in Hell caught the attention of James L. Brooks, who wanted to adapt it as a short for the Tracy Ullman Show. Groening was afraid of losing the rights to his characters and that the show would fail and take down his comic. He pitched a new idea. While waiting in lobby of James L. Brooks' office, he came up with the idea for The Simpsons and quickly sketched the family out and pitched that instead. As we all know, The Simpsons became a huge success and has been going on for more than 30 years and is the longest-running American primetime scripted television series with over 662 episodes and many Emmy Awards. It never would have happened if Groening hadn't been afraid. The domino effect of the media movie streaming industry is fascinating. Netflix starts as the DVD mailer business. They try to get bought out by Blockbuster, but Blockbuster doesn't make the right offer. Netflix gets into streaming. Blockbuster's entire business collapses. Now there are a handful of companies competing for the space that Netflix revolutionized. That the width of the app of an ancient Roman mule determined the size of the space shuttle. We're still fighting over events that can be traced back to the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, ignoring the fact that it wasn't World War I until we had the second one. There was the Cold War, Korea and Vietnam, and the Israel-Palestine debate, to name a few. In the early 20th century there was an issue of humidity in printing press rooms causing the ink to run. A man named William Carrier invented a dehumidifier to suck the moisture out of the air, and it worked. The ink dried faster and stayed dry, and as an unseen side effect it kept the rooms cooler too. Thus the precursor to the modern air conditioner was inadvertently invented. At first it was only used for industrial purposes, and it wasn't until after WW2 that smaller units were manufactured and made readily available to the public. This led to a huge migration of city-dwelling folks from the north to more rural areas. Conservatives' retirees were settling in the South without having to worry about discomfort from the heat and/or heat-related injuries for the elderly. This caused a huge shift in electoral college votes from North to South. Another side effect of air conditioning was when it started being put in movie theaters. Before, being crammed in a room with a bunch of other sweaty people to watch a movie just wasn't enjoyable. Once theaters could be cooled, it became way more popular to go to when it was sweltering hot outside. Thus, the summer blockbuster. Movies became not only a device for entertainment but also a way for pop culture to shift the political climate. During the Vietnam War there weren't very many pro-military movies since the general population was pretty much against the war. It wasn't until George Lucas came out with the Star Wars trilogy that people were able to enjoy heroic stories of battle and triumphing over evil. It was around the second Star Wars movie that a man named Ronald Reagan was campaigning his plans on how to deal with the evil empire known as the Soviet Union. The Democrats, in an attempt to make his missile defense plan sound silly, dubbed it Star Wars. This had the opposite effect because people thought it sounded cool. People also resonated with the rebels trying to overthrow an oppressive government the same way that Ronald Reagan was taking on big government in America. In 1980 Ronald Reagan was elected president. So in an effort to keep ink smearing on the pages of newspapers in the printing press room, it set off a domino effect that led to Ronald Reagan being elected 40th President of the United States. A reduced honeybee population creates a domino effect in the food chain. Alfalfa, a crop that is pollinated by honeybees, plays a crucial role in keeping our environment healthy. Researchers have claimed that the extinction of just one animal has the potential to create a domino effect that could result in the extinction of many more species. Because alfalfa is the main food source for dairy cows and a secondary food source for beef cows, sheep and horses, the decline of alfalfa yield could be a devastating blow to the dairy and beef industries. Without enough alfalfa to feed livestock, they could become endangered or even extinct. Franz Ferdinand's driver taking a wrong turn triggered WW1 and essentially everything after it. A kid failed the entrance exam to an art school and now hentai is real. The Buffalo Bills are responsible for the fame of the Kardashians. Columbus discover the West Indies. Pizarro follow him in South America. Spain bring potatoes to Europe. It becomes the main food of poor people in Ireland. The Irish potato famine in 1845 lead to a massive migration to the US. The Kennedy family arrive in 1849. The moon in 1969. When Margaret Beaufort was a baby, the king promised her father she could inherit her father's wealth if he would fight in an upcoming battle if something happened to him. He fought and was taken prisoner and died. Margaret got that fortune and was determined it would pass through her lineage. A few decades later King Richard passed a new law that said a woman's wealth passed to her husband, not her descendant. Margaret was by this time on her third husband, and had an only son by a previous marriage, and the thought of her husband inheriting her father's legacy instead of her son pissed Margaret off. Margaret was a lady-in-waiting and that gave her access to a lot of information. She started conspiring with Elizabeth Woodville, mother to the princes in the Tower. They conspired to overthrow the king, making a deal that Margaret's son and Elizabeth's daughter would marry. They gathered support, passed on secrets, and that led to Margaret's son, Henry Tudor, killing King Richard and establishing the Tudor dynasty and the British monarchy eventually being stable enough that they focused on other things like exploration. Alternate History Hub did an amazing video on this. Woodrow Wilson's election is the reason America got involved in the First World War so late. If America had been involved in the war earlier, Germany would have fallen sooner, possibly with a more complete victory. The Great War would have ended 2 years sooner and be seen as an incredibly war, but not a special war. With Russia being in a much better position in the war, the provisional government would have most likely gained legitimacy by either winning the war, or winning multiple battles on the Eastern Front. This means the extreme Stalinist communism never would have risen in Russia, which means China never would have fallen, which means there never would have been a Red Scare, which means Germany never would have turned to fascism like it did. And speaking of which, Germany may have even gotten a better deal in the Treaty of Versailles, which means they would be less pissy and Germany would have been in a better spot after the war. And on top of all of this, Woodrow Wilson is the one who segregated the government, promoted Southern revisionism style thought. He promoted Wilsonian interventionism and the holier-than-thou style of intervention America still practices to this day, using the idea of democracy to do whatever it wants. and if his opponent who was more likely to win, Teddy Roosevelt, won, we could have seen welfare, higher taxes on the rich, a healthcare system, social security, and a whole bunch of other shit that we struggle with today. America also wouldn't have pissed off other countries as much by butting its nose into the business despite only being involved in the war for a year, and would have been legitimate since it fought nearly as long as Britain. British officers in India during the 18th century were eating quinine powder to treat their malaria. The powder was so bitter they mixed with the club soda. They brought it back to the UK and they started putting it in the gin, hence gin and tonic. The fall of the Aztec and Incan empires, caused in part by the conquistadors, led to massive reforestation in areas that were once designated for cities and farmland cleared for crops, animals. This led to a massive fall in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which brought about around 200 years of excessively cold winters in Europe, leading to a mini ice age which ended around 1750.